Uh, Hello guys, good morning. Today we're gonna be presenting a desperate trek across America. So A Desperate Trek Across America is written by Andres Resendez. It's a mentor text. A mentor text is a text that is meant for rereading, and it helps students change up their writing and pushes them to take many risks. What does it mean to be a stranger in a strange land? Is the essential question for this article. Before reading the story, you're gonna answer. Uh, your answer will most likely be very vague and plain. But we will answer this question with detail shortly. Moving on to the summary. Summary. Andres Resendez gives an account of a group of 250 Spanish conquistadors stranded on the coast of Florida in 1528. Conquistadors is a conqueror, mostly of Spanish origins, by Alvar Nunes Cabiza de Vaca, endured starvation, disease, exposure, and enslavement. After many years, only 4 men survived, and those 4 men were Cabiza de Vaca, 2 Spaniards that were in high commanding positions, and an African slave named Estebanico. They lived among Native Americans who believed the 4 men possessed healing powers. Eventually, Cabiza de Vaca returned to Spain and advocated for the humane colonization of the New World. Humane colonization means he wanted them to treat the Native Americans better. And moving on to the next slide, insight and connection. Uh, the article shows how the 4 men had to adjust to new and strange situations in order to survive. It highlights the intelligence and creativity of the conquistadors when they are put in a bizarre situation. For example, when they made jury-rigged saws, which were made in an improvised way and are for like temporary use, it shows that wits may be the best skill a person needs to be able to cope with strange circumstances. Thank you for listening to my part, and now I'll be passing this on to my qualified friend Faris Alsaggaf.
Okay. Hello, Hamza. Thank you for your beautiful insight about this beautiful unit and story. Can you please move on to the next slide, please? Okay. So our first word is conquistador, which is a Spanish soldier or serviceman. And I'll put each word in a sentence. So for the first word, we have conquistador. In a sentence, it's many Spanish conquistadors fought in the war. That's an example. The second word is posse, which means an armed group or band. And in a sentence, for example, coffee was handed round by a posse of mothers. Uh, Second word is flotilla, which is a small fleet of boats or ships. And an example of that is I saw a flotilla of boats. Next, we have expedition, which is a laborious or arduous journey. An example of that is an expedition to the museum. Unimpended, which means long and drawn out. And in a sentence, for example, is an unimpended view across the headland. The next word is interminable, which means not disrupted or cut off. An example of that is we got distracted by the interminable discussions. Next word is straits, which is a position of trouble or difficulty. An example is the straits of the ocean. And lastly, our word, the next last word is odyssey, which means a long journey or adventure. And for example, Mario basically goes on an adventure. And yeah, that's basically a good example of the word. Yeah. So next slide, please. Okay. So now we're gonna analyze and evaluate evidence from paragraph 6. And so to start off here, we have a very meaningful and important line from the story. It says humans are capable of great feats when their survivals is at stake. And then we have from paragraph 11, it says Kabiza Devaka sees himself as helped by God. It also helped show difficult circumstances he survived. So this is an amazing example. And connecting this to real life, a lot of people learn from their difficult circumstances they go through in life. And this can help them learn and not repeat the same mistakes if they made any. And mistakes can help you become a better person in the future if you learn from them. And another important moral is that sometimes being put in like harsh and dreadful situations, it can make you a stronger person and allow your intelligence and wits to spark, which is shown throughout this story. It's a prime example. And because sometimes being put in the same situations in life won't change you. You know, allow only the same person. You'll just be the same person, and the real you shows when you're put in harsh situations and circumstances. So yeah, can you please move on? Next slide. Question we have, I'm going to be answering some questions. So first question is, why did the Spanish adventurers call the estuary near their campsite the Bay of Horses? And then the answer is because they were killing their horses, then cooking and roasting them to feast on their meat. Second question is, why is the trip by raft so difficult for the Spaniards? And the answer is because none of them have any experience in sailing and therefore are unable to navigate. And they are also growing weaker due to starvation and illness. Okay, and the last question is, what does Cabiza de Vaca do after returning to Spain for the first time? And the answer is he advocates for better treatment of Native Americans and for humane colonization of the New World. Okay, thank you. That's my part, and I'm gonna pass it on to my dear friend Faisal Khashab.
Thank you, Faris, for your beautiful presentation. And now I'm going to move on by analyzing the text. So first, we have a question here. The author includes accounts of makeshift vessels manufactured using jury-rigged tools. How do these descriptions affect your perspective of the situation? Well, these descriptions are used to dictate the lack of resources and equipment available to the Spaniards. It also depicts the gravity of the situation and how desperate they were to find anything they could clutch onto to get out of the situation and might aid and help them to survive the state. Moving on, in what ways were Kabiji Vaca and the other survivors forced to cope with native North America on its own terms? Cite text evidence in your response. So, after they were washed ashore, they had nothing else to do. So they were forced to immerse themselves amongst the natives and seek aid from them. To do so, they had to adapt to their culture and even had to learn half a dozen native languages. They were also forced to refashion themselves into medicine men and become healers for the Native Americans. Last question is, the author concludes that Kabiji and the others had been utterly transformed by their experience. What examples and evidence support this conclusion? Well, after living with the Native Americans and having been immersed in their lifestyle, Kabiji and his men grew a deep appreciation for the Native Americans and their culture. This was, of course, opposite to most other Europeans who only saw Native Americans as tools to be used. Also, unlike at the beginning of the story where Kabiji said he used to control the Indians and keep them at bay by his breastplates, horses, and lethal weapons, he is now advocating for humane colonization without the use of brutal force. Next, we're going to talk about the similarities and differences between Kabiji and Balboa. So first, we'll start with the similarities. So both of them exhibit that they are determined to do whatever they have in mind, and that they will persevere through all obstacles in their path. This is shown by Kabiji fighting for his survival desperately, and by Balboa climbing the mountain. Next is power. So both Kabiji Rivaka and Balboa have power and influence over others. Kabiji Rivaka is the leader of over 250 Spanish conquistadors, whereas Balboa has 1,000 Indians and 200 Spaniards under his control. Last, we have all the misfortune that both have gone through. Kabiji Rivaka has gone through drought, starvation, illness, and even had his companions die in his very arms, while Balboa overcame numerous difficulties to get to where he is. He was deemed as a traitor, had to escape while being known as a criminal, and even at the end was executed as a result of his acts. Moving on to the differences between the two, Kabiji Rivaka is a competent leader who cares about his followers and is actively supporting them, while Balboa only cares about himself and doesn't really care about any of his underlings. Kabiji Rivaka also trusts his crewmates and knows he can rely and depend on them, while Balboa does not trust anyone except for himself and his pet Leoncio. The final difference between the two is the gap between their intentions. So while Balboa is trying to usurp the kingdom and bring it under his control, Kabiji Rivaka only wants to seek fair treatment of others and humane colonization. Now we'll move on to my friend Abdulrahman Alghamdi, who will answer a few questions relating to the story.
Yes, hello. I'll be doing some questions, and I hope you understand. Well, the first question is, how did the quotations from Cabeza de Vaca affect our understanding of him? I'll also mention some evidence. The writer used the quotations to allow us to be able to judge the Vaca for ourselves. Multiple quotations shed light upon the Vaca's strong-willed belief in his religion. For example, when he said, "We prayed as best as we could to God our Lord." He also mentioned, "It pleased God that I found a tree aflame." The second question: why did the author include information on the survivor's transformation into medicine men? Well, the answer is it's going to be pretty long. The survivors became medicine men when they started reciting Christian prayers, such as Peter Noster and Ave Maria, which then the natives believed to have healing powers. Well, they were still less advanced than most other countries, so they didn't know much about medicine and healing. And the survivors used this perceived power to their advantage to become valuable assets to the natives. So now the mixture of cultural beliefs showed the integrity and resourcefulness of these men. That's why he obviously mentioned it. Third and final question: the author used the quotation, "We were in such straits that anything that had some semblance of a solution seemed good to us." Why? He used it to show how bad and harsh the conditions they were in. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and I hope you had fun.